Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much to our resource persons. So far, Maria Ressa has made a very good presentation. I assume she's talking from experience, being the victim of the trolls, etc. Maria, you have been exposed to this anomaly. Is there any legislation that you can suggest that we enact in order to solve partially, or we cannot totally prevent this? I can understand that, but is there a way by which we can at least minimize it? For example, government officials would post on Facebook that senators are cardinals of the NPA, identifying myself, Senator Poe, Senator Gatsalian, Senator Monteveros, Senator Villanueva, that we are cardinals of the NPA simply because we oppose the NTF-LCAC budget. There is this Director General of the Public Information Agency, Undersecretary Waluping, who doesn't care. He just uses the social media to hit everyone. Now, so I'll ask a general question, Maria. Having been exposed to these practices, is there anything that we can do by legislation?
Senator Drilon, thank you so much for the question. And, what you're describing is impunity. Part of the reason it has now continued and grown is because the first people who did it got away with it and then were empowered to do it. And here's the other part: the algorithms of distribution actually rewarded them for it, because this is a study, I'll put in the link, but as early as 2018, we know that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further on social media, because facts are kind of boring. So what can we do? Far be it from me to say, but the easy one is, the question I always have is, since we don't have Section 230, are they not just a publishing platform?
Was that we don't have section? Did I hear you? Can you have
yes. In the United States, part of the reason that the social media platforms, that the tech platforms are able to move forward without any accountability or liability for content for information operations is because there's a law in 1996 that was passed, and the Section 230 gives them cover. But in the Philippines, we actually don't. And I think,
Yes, just for purposes of placing it on record, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So, in other words, this refers to Facebook, Google, etc., right?
The publisher is exempted from any liability, whereas in traditional media, the publisher is made responsible because theoretically they have control over the media outlets, particular newspapers or radio, etc. But in social media, the platform owners are not held responsible. They're not considered as publishers. Are you saying that if that one remedy is to consider them as publishers?
It's certainly something that I have thought about. So the question really for the Senate and for Filipino authorities is, who is responsible for gatekeeping? Because for a long time, journalists were responsible for that, and you could hold us liable, right? Imagine if, like a television network, imagine if when we had the power of television, we could do whatever we wanted. That wasn't the case, but that's essentially the case now with this new, far more powerful technology.
television stations have, they have to get a franchise from government, so you regulate them in that regard. I don't think the Facebook or Google go through such scrutiny. So it's yeah, that may be one area. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would just say one caution in terms of regulation is something that the platforms bring up all the time, which is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time you will see Facebook, since you're here, Rob, I will use you as you will see Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg say that because they believe in freedom of speech, that they can't do anything or they will do very little. But the problem is that freedom of speech, this is not a freedom of speech issue. It's actually a freedom of distribution. It's a freedom of amplification, right? So you can what happens is when you look at it as a freedom of speech issue, you look at the content, which is so 20th century. When you only look at the content, you get lost because it's not about the content. It's about the operating system run by algorithms of amplification.
Yeah.
What governs those algorithms? And then finally, the last part is all the way upstream is the actual business model of the platforms. It's called Surveillance Capitalism, 750-page book by Shoshana Zuboff, but I can put in a summary of it. But what it does is all of these problems that we've been talking about, content moderation, privacy, antitrust, they all come up to who owns our data, right? Who owns, because essentially our private lives atomized when we post on Facebook or YouTube, or all of that data is harnessed by machine learning, which builds a model of us that knows us more than we know ourselves. Then AI, artificial intelligence, comes in, and what the platforms say is that they own our data. And that is a hotly debated issue globally. So these are all, where are you going to intervene? Don't intervene in the content because then you can actually be accused of censorship. But if you go to the algorithms of amplification, because everyone can say what they think, but what your neighbor said never reaches broadcast scale until today, because there have been no guardrails on the distribution of lies.
So, Riza, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
did I hear you correctly that we should consider the online platform as the publisher, so that with that classification, the online platform would incur the same liability as a publisher in print media or television? Because right now, as you have cited, Section 230 of a law passed in 1996 does not consider them as publisher. And therefore, under the freedom of speech protection, you get all kinds of abuses. I have don't get me wrong. Yes, we should defend the freedom of speech, but as in any freedom, there must be responsibility. And in the case that we are in the situation that we are today, because the online platform is not considered as a publisher, everybody could just take on the platform and libel everyone. That's a problem. In other words, that's why you have trolls. You don't know who they are. So how can you exercise your remedies when you don't even know who they are? And that is why the only remedy that some people have suggested, the retired Justice Antonio Carpio, in the hearing here, said that he recommends that the online platform be considered as the publisher, and that the platform should uh, disclose the real identities. These are, we're grappling with solutions here. these are some of the solutions suggested, and I would like to present this to you for your comment.
Senator Drilon, I believe, like Francis Haugen, that Facebook can do better and will do better in the future. Must for all of our, and it's not just Facebook, right? YouTube has also radicalized that. There's a lot of studies that show that when you click on one video, it keeps you on by giving you more radical content. So I'm not so sure I agree with the idea of stripping away anonymity. In our country, it's not so. Let me rephrase it this way. We cannot wait for the EU or the United States to actually put guardrails in place, because our elections are the first of this year's, among the first. It's us and Hungary, followed by Kenya, France. The US has its own election. So every single country will have the same problem. In our country, what can we do, right? And in that case, we don't have Section 230. So the quick solution would be to actually hold the platforms accountable for what they spread, what they allowed to spread. And when you do that, I bet you that you would automatically see a shrinking of information operations. The other thing, though, is I don't know what impact that would have on lesser known candidates, because what we know for sure, and this is something that we've seen starting in 2014 and 2015, I put a link here to the disinformation, the operations of the Marcos family. It's very well documented in there. There is a lot of data that supports that. We've mapped the networks. So real people now believe the lies. We have a few months before elections. How are you going to change that? And this is part of, I think, what these technology platforms have done globally. It's not just in the Philippines.
Yeah. Go. You still have other follow-up questions, Senator Drilon, please?
No, well, one other drawback that we have, one other difficulty that we have, is the anonymity. The platform users, the trolls, remain anonymous. Therefore, in effect, they have no responsibility. I do not know if making the online platform operators as the publisher would compel them to at least know the real identity of these trolls. What do you think, Maria?
Senator, so, sir, what the platforms do know are things that we don't see, the device, for example, other identifying marks, but they could certainly very easily, because as a policy, they ask us to register. And so starting to actually enforce their registration is a good point, so that you have, I believe you've already seen all the troll farms or companies like Cambridge Analytica, where they could just mass produce fake accounts. Well, a lot of that now has been dealt with to a degree, but what hasn't been dealt with is what will require a lot more investment on the platform's part, which is to actually make sure that the people who are there are accountable for what they do. Because there are a lot of policies they have that aren't enforced, right? And then the cloak that will be used is, well, it's there's too many. We have almost 3 billion accounts, and my response to that always is, and so why do you have 3 billion accounts? Again, I'll use television, the technology, as an example. If imagine that if you had the power to distribute, that you are then allowed to distribute the worst of human nature and you make money from it. That is what surveillance capitalism shows, is that in the optimization, they bring out the worst of human nature and they profit off of it. So, sorry, I'll shut up because there are others, but it must stop.
Yeah, go ahead. I have a quick question on the issue of profits. Could you give us? Would you have a sense, Maria, of exactly how much, for example, profits would be made on a given account, for example, of 5 million subscribers, and there are TV ads or there are commercial company ads being uploaded. Would you have a sense of how much? Because I understand. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to say, looking at those individuals, it's kind of like a system of laws, right? If we look at the people who are doing that, that doesn't actually help, because I think one of the things that we're doing is we're lost in the details, but we're allowing systemic harm to continue. And so, yes, there have been lots of people who have made a lot of money. There are digital outfits that are created to mislead. And this is really insidious manipulation. I think you saw a report in the last hearing that looked at how advertisers were taken, and a black ops operation has been created. But that's not really the problem. These are groups that are taking advantage of the weaknesses of a system to manipulate people. So I think that's where you should, I can send the details in terms of how much revenues have grown, how much has been set aside to deal with these harms to real people. Essentially, the platforms continue to use surveillance capitalism, and then they blame the users. I've heard officers say, well, it's really human nature. That is just wrong. It is, what the platforms have done is to create emergent human behavior that discounts empathy, that cuts out the goodness of human nature. And that's part of the reason we have shifted the world to fascism. This is a statistic from the Oxford University's Computational Propaganda Research Project. There are at least 81 countries around the world that are using information ops, cheap armies on social media to insidiously manipulate their people. We need like a better business bureau to protect us